So hi, everybody, and welcome to CMX Connect. Just for those of you who might be new to the organization or might want a little refresher, CMX Connect is the largest association of community professionals dedicated to helping them grow and learn. You can connect with other community professionals through CMX's virtual, hybrid, and in-person events. And I will send a link for you to check out some other events. And this year, the summit is returning. This year, it will be in Silicon Valley, September 13th through 15th, and it will be a hybrid event. So first time in person for 3 years and also virtually. I'll paste a link in the chat as well. And also, thank you for attending. Venya has graciously provided us with some worksheets that you can use and take back to your community to solve your community problems with. So we're very excited, and I will be sharing that with you shortly. So I've posted a few questions in the chat, and I'm wondering if you would, during the presentation, just tell us a little bit about yourself. If you want to add your LinkedIn link and want to connect with others here, that's always a wonderful thing to do. So I'm going to introduce you to Venya. This is from her biography. In 2010, I transitioned from male to female and put my entire 10-year journey on YouTube. Before I knew it, I had 4,400 closeted and questioning people asking for resources without wanting to be measured. Over the next decade, that decision had snowballed into an active career in community management, diversity, marketing, and measurement. It's taken me through anthropology and sociology courses, marketing certifications, and analytic workshops. For the past 5 years, I've built strong platforms and onboarding methods for brand marketing and community management online. With Socially Constructed Online, that's her firm, I'm committed to helping businesses build robust, self-sustainable communities. I want to offer you and your businesses that same chance. Spend fewer resources in advertising. Develop a solid measurement-focused strategy that monitors lifetime value across the customer value journey to build a financially and socially rewarding community for you. So I'm ready. If you guys are, let's bring Venya up to the stage. Welcome, Venya.
Hello. I'm super excited to be here. Also a little bit nervous, but it's kind of just one of those really wonderful things about public speaking, and I'm super excited to get started, but we have a lot of ground to cover, and I want a lot of interaction throughout the course of this, because a lot of these social structures, they take a lot to get your head around, and conversation is like the easiest way to do that. So let's go ahead and get these slides shared. I'm going to go kind of fast, but then we're going to talk about it on the regular. All right. So we have a slide deck, foundational social scientific methods for community. I'm really excited to get started, but a few things first. There is a promise here, right, between us talking and you going out and making an impact on your community. So I want you to plan big, get creative, go build the things, but do me a favor, plan big and progress small. First, get that one good step out there and plan for a mistake to happen, because then you're going to take that mistake, work it back into your plan, and it's going to build a better plan. And you'll just want to do this one concept at a time. So go out, master that one concept. And when you start feeling bored, come back. I'm going to be here. This recording is going to be here. CMX is going to be here. We're all going to be able to just discuss these things a little bit more moving forward. So we already had an amazing introduction, but one of the most important things is I started in the LGBTQ community. And the big problem that I had when I went online and I found a bunch of closeted and questioning people who were scared to be outed online, but wanted resources, I had to measure people who didn't want to be measured. Security and anonymity were their primary. So I spent 5 years going into academics trying to learn that, and they didn't really know where to put me. So I found myself in sociology, communication, anthropology, etc. And then when I came out of that, I'm like, wait a minute, I don't know how the internet actually works. So I spent half a decade learning freelancing. And ever since then, that's kind of where I kicked off. But before we truly get started, I want to introduce you to one other person. His name is John Scully. He was one of the most influential marketers for Fortune 500 businesses from the 80s to the early 2000s. And he's kicking himself right now. If you're in the chat, you know why. He says, no great marketing decisions have ever been made on qualitative data. He was wrong. That's literally Google's entire structure. Using keyword engagement, using management, big data, figuring out what people do, audience research, and then selling all of those audience profiles to their advertisers. That's all social science. That's all qualitative data. So it's gotten so big now that we can tell you with almost pinpoint accuracy what people think, what they desire, what they fear. We can predict elections using search infrastructure on Google. So it's a really, really big deal. Social science is critical. Now, again, we have a lot to cover. So there's a big part of the social scientific process, rules of generalization, we're going to cover as well. The one I'm most excited about, Socio-Ecological Model, and the one I built my business on, communication constitutes organizations theory. Sounds pretty crazy. And if we have time, wicked problems mindset. So let's get started. What is community? It feels like all presentations start with this statement. David has something different from Melissa, who has something different from Jono, who has something different from Susie. All these big players in the community space define community differently. But the most important thing to note is that community's been a word for a really long time. And we've had a definition for community since way back in the 1940s with Franz Boas, the father of sociology and anthropology, Margaret Mead, probably my favorite anthropologist. And this is what it is. Community is a defined unit of culture. So now we have to define culture. What exactly is that? It is the set of shared attitudes, values, goals, experiences, and practices that characterize a defined group. And that's the most important part here, a defined group of any specific size. And we're not just talking about amount of people. We're talking about how much land it covers, how big the domain is, how long it's been around. These boundaries are going to be what we talk about in social science, because community is a social science. And we used the term foundational in this chat really specifically, because if you go back to your foundations of science with the scientific method, elementary school career, the scientific method is insufficient. It's insufficient for community. And you've been running into that problem a lot. How do you prove the ROI of your community? It's staring right you in the face. You need a new model. And this is what that new model has been for a really long time. This is the social scientific process. And it did four main things to augment the scientific method. The first one is longevity. It made it possible for you to run a longitudinal experiment off of data that you collected and had no idea what to do with. So you're just collecting the data, you don't know how to use it, and then you're benchmarking that data against itself. So you come up with a hypothesis, you benchmark it, and then you go back to that data and you say, is this actually true? The other thing that it did is variables. In the scientific method, you are introducing a single variable or a few variables, testing it, figuring it out. That doesn't exist. Communities don't work like that. There's just too many variables and it's too open. You're not in a lab. So we moved away from measuring variables in social science to measuring scope, that limitation of that community, that defined unit. You are now taking a look at the scope and saying, here's things that define my community culture in group A, and it's moving forward into group B. Now, how does this work? It uses something called the rules of generalization. Now, the rules of generalization are what social science produced in lieu of something called the law of numbers. In traditional science and in math, the law of numbers essentially holds that the bigger the data set, the more accurate the numbers are. We don't have that in social science because we have too much stuff going on. We have qualitative data that can't be abstracted. So we created this. And there are 5 currently valid methods of generalizing qualitative data. We're not even going to go over these. You're going to get the slides. But the most important thing is that they all boil down to this super handy formula. And this is the first real structure that you're going to see in the talk. A, concept. This thing is happening in my community. Applies to B, population. Here's the people it's talking about. And it only applies so far as C, limitation. And that's the really important part, C, limitation. If you don't have C, limitation bin your data, it's pointless. You'll just want to keep it, observe it, sure, yes. But if you don't have C, limitation, you don't have a testable social scientific hypothesis. So let's apply it now. Let's talk about the causation problem. You probably get this a lot in your community careers, but correlation doesn't connect to causation. What's going on there? How do you verify it? Well, the reality is you can bin it because causation isn't something to prove. It is a result of proof of correlation over time. So here we have a pyramid of data specificity. So at the bottom, you have a ton of data and it's all reporting true. It all happened, but we can't use it yet. It hasn't really been massaged into something that matters. And then as you move up the pyramid, you start to figure out exactly what data matters. So you're dealing with less of it, but you've made that data useful. You've started to ask and answer questions and then direct actions that you can take. And once you start to look at the scope or the optics and how things change, you can benchmark last week, 6 months ago, a year ago, 20 years ago, against what's happening now and determine what changed in your scope. And at a certain point, you'll notice that we become metrics obsessed. And that's where we start to worry about how do you prove it? What's causation? How do you manage your behaviors? How do you confirm it? You don't have to worry about that. You really just want to be right there, just below the causation effect. And yes, correlation is not causation, but enough correlation to produce action will give you a solid understanding of your community. So what I'd like to do is I would like to ask, is this useful? So think about in your community, what have you been struggling with? How would you apply this social scientific infrastructure? And what I'd like is to have you share your expertise in the comments. And I'd like to maybe get a case study from someone that we can kind of talk a little bit about. We have a little bit of time to do that.
Would anyone like to volunteer?
And Ritu, we can share that link for you. And if not, I can just get it to you at the end. Hey, Cassie.
Hello, it was just popping on the screen in case anyone wants to chime in. You can pop comments in the chat, or if you want your video turned on, we can do that too. I just turned it off for everyone for that intro part, just to make sure we can see.
And if not, there will be several other opportunities, one for each foundational method that we're going to cover here. But I guess I will go ahead and move on for this one round, but definitely share your stories in the chat. We want to hear potential use cases that you might have. All right. So we're going to talk about the one that I'm most excited about now, the socio-ecological model. So the socio-ecological model is probably the most obvious thing you've ever heard as a community manager. But when it became an actual thing in academia, it spawned entire companies. It changed entire government infrastructures. And it's actually a really, really important theory in social science. But it's also the one that I keep coming back to every time in my community career. And essentially, it was made by Urie Braunbrenner in the early 80s. And it's super simple. This is essentially holding that there are boundaries or scopes of study and of knowledge in our society that all interact with one another at different levels. So the first one is inside your head, right? You have like this self-talk and this self-understanding that generates an identity. And then you have this individual level. You're putting yourself out there. What's your knowledge, your attitudes, your skills? And then how does that interact with your local groups, your family, your friends, your social networks? Sometimes you have a small little community in between that and your organizations, your institutions. And once you get up to the institutional level, you start to build a shared identity between each other. You start to build an organization, you start to put down documentation for it. And then you move into the broader community. How is that organization interacting with other organizations in the space, with people, users, etc.? And then at the top of that, you have public policy that says our culture or our society is doing all of these things, and we need to set the rules of engagement. And then it goes down too. So let's talk about application. Here you'll see up at the top, marketing versus community, right? So community is this hugely individual thing. And at a certain point in time, they intersect and meet, they clash, they connect. And that could either be a clash point for your community, support versus marketing, or sales versus marketing, community management versus marketing, or it could be an opportunity of collaboration. Marketing builds a perfect onboarding process for your community that generates interactions, that produce sales, that make things helpful for support, that create successful community members that then go out into the broader community and connect. Huge opportunity. And it really just depends on how close you get people to that individual level. So if we were to apply that, we have a structure for our onboarding processes that goes along this progression. So first you have a user who finds something useful for your organization. You provide a product or a service and it's there, and you make them successful. You have now changed something in their lives that encourages them to believe in you more. So they get closer. And then they start to engage and they start to recognize the people behind this organization, the values that they want to fall for. And then they say, yes, I want to support this fact. And then it becomes meaningful to them. And that is how you build what Susie Nelson considers like the gold standard, the holy grail of community, increased self-disclosure in your communities that brings people together. Another application is your brand. If you have a singular brand voice, and I know that a lot of us community managers get so frustrated with our CEOs and our organizations for not allowing this, your brand voice has to change based upon the socio-ecological model. You want to start talking a little bit closer, a little bit better, and you want to build that infrastructure from the get-go. And that's what the first exercise is. Cassie or Lori, if you want to go ahead and share that into the chat. This is a discussion that you can have to build a brand voice that gets closer and closer and closer. So you have a marketing public voice. How does that change on your blogs or email blasts? And then once you're at physical events, how are you interacting? What people are you putting in front of them? Who do you want them to get to know? So that's kind of where we come into the next question. Is this useful, the socio-ecological model? So I'd love to hear your advice, your input here. Have you run into problems like that? And do you see this being a potential solution?
Does anyone have any thoughts they'd like to share?
So, hi, this is Ritu here.
Hi, Ritu.
So, just thinking a little deeper about the socio-ecological concept and trying to apply it to my community, just trying to identify those layers. We building out a community of working professionals who are essentially upskilling themselves or aspiring to become product managers. And what we find in the community is we have the aspiring folks, like the newbies, and then we have mid to senior. these people enter the community on their own accord or because companies are nominating their employees. If I were to apply this particular framework, what would those layers look like? Is would love to hear your viewpoint on that.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And there is, in my view, there is a set along the socio-ecological scale, right? Because there's limitations in scope. And if you consider each scope as them taking another step, you have to give them the value to see what's beyond that step, to be like, okay, I want to take this step. And then once they do, you have to reward their action somehow, right? So for you, for entrepreneurs, you might provide some information on building a better LinkedIn. And then after that LinkedIn, you start to build an event for them to congregate, to gather together. And then once they get closer, you start to build a personal brand with some of the people who were most successful in your campaign, right? So if you think about it, you build a feature for each membrane to bring them closer, and then it changes. Does that kind of answer it?
Yeah, that does. And I have a follow up question on that. You mentioned that the metric to determine how meaningful the community is and self disclosure. Could you just elaborate how would this self disclosure actually manifest itself or in the community? What kind of behaviors would actually showcase or hint that, hey, self disclosure is starting to take place now?
Yeah. That's a really great question, right? And if we think about metrics for encouraging self-disclosure, a lot of behaviors might be increased interaction or increased status. They start to feel like veterans. They start to talk and feel more comfortable. So you might measure how long an average post might be based upon words. Do they feel comfortable elaborating or the ratio of comments to questions? But there's also more than behavior, right? Self-disclosure is oftentimes about being vulnerable, being connected. So there's that aspect of social listening that you might have that kind of encourages that self-disclosure. And once you get to that point where people are just like, hey, I'm a business owner full time and I'm a mom and I'm really, really struggling. And I just went to the doctor and was given some really, really bad news that I might have a disease or something along those lines, they start to feel like super, super comfortable with that connection and they start to build those interactions. Count that as a win because you've now developed a community where people are comfortable enough, not necessarily to talk about your product or service, but to talk to each other about really sensitive topics. Does that kind of
Great.
help? So at this point, we do still have a lot of ground to cover. So I'm going to go ahead and move into the next structure. And then if we have time at the end of the talk, we'll kind of return back to the socio-ecological model. All right. So the next one, this one is the one I built my entire community, my entire brand on. I'm very excited about this. Truth be told, the socio-ecological model is a lot more applicable in my daily life. But this one is the one that cuts out the red tape. This is the one that solves most of the problems I have with the executive teams for the clients that I work with. This is the one that I think makes the most sense to a lot of business owners for how to engage with and get value from their communities. And as the head of a community yourself, or as a business owner who's looking to develop that community, I strongly recommend just adapting a formal version of this structure. So you'll see a lot of similarities with the socio-ecological model, but if you've heard the term ever, the real work happens at the bar. If you've heard conversations of grapevine communication is more important than all our formal meetings, this is why. An idea often requires time to propagate, and communication literally builds meeting notes into policies, into SOPs. Your organization is literally built by the communication of the people who interact. And if you ever doubt that, just think CEO before founding a company very likely spent a lot of time talking about what they wanted to commit their lives to before they ever actually put pen to paper. So how does this actually work? You have an idea from an individual formed and you get super excited about it and you're like, hey, you know what we should do? I think that we should do this. And you start to float the idea out to the general public and you start to get organic ideation. You're at the bar and you're like, yeah, I think this is how this might work. I'm not really too sure, but do you think this is a good idea? And people are like, yeah, maybe we should run with this. And then you have a formal conversation. So sometimes this is going to happen at like coffee or in just an office or just an informal meeting. And you have like this discussion and you set firmer rules. Here's what this is going to look like. You put together your proposal and your meeting notes, and suddenly you have that first tangible artifact of a conversation being made. And it's that first tangible artifact where shared understanding begins to happen. And off of that shared understanding, you can forge a stronger, bigger consensus. You can make your presentation, you can bring more people in, you can find the experts. And once all of that is built, you then create this bigger thing that says, here's how this is going to happen. Here's why. Here's the shared concept. Here's the standard operating procedure. We're doing it now. And it's a very bottom-up kind of idea. But once you get to that shared concept, it's become a part of your organizational environment. And people start to respond to that change with more ideas. And it keeps going. And it's this cycle that works. And if you can extend this concept beyond your organization or beyond your stakeholder team into your larger community, you have now succeeded at making work and reward expand beyond the boundaries of your small team. That means less stress. That means better ideas. That means better products and services. So let's apply it. Like I said before, there is this concept of shared understanding. And it's important to recognize where on these continuums you are, because there is a tension between the two. Sometimes you're going to be too informal and abstract and people are like, I don't know what you're talking about. Can you like put down a checklist? Can you maybe make a proposal? Or can you spearhead this? Can you lead this? And we'll follow. There's a hierarchical action, and then you want to clarify that shared meaning in order to bring people to consensus. And then over time, that gets too restrictive. That gets too difficult. And people are like, you know, you haven't really asked me exactly how I am. Things are very task-oriented here. Can we have more relational discussion? Can we have a desire for radical candor? Hey, I don't think this idea is really going to go well. I think we're falling into some groupthink. Or we're looking for more information and more action to go beyond where this is. So that's what communication constitutes organizations theory is. In my opinion, it's probably one of the best theories for working through red tape and actually building a lot of your programs, starting with your foundational community charter and then going into actual areas. So the big question, is it useful? Is there any light bulb moment happening with any of you or any way that you can implement this in your communities?
Feel free to unmute yourself and start your video if you'd like, and let us know what you think.
Hi, everybody. I might not have a specific use case just because I'm an SDR that works with Bevy, so I work with a lot of community managers. But many of the things that you are saying, I see it very, very useful, and it spots onto a lot of the people that I talk to in terms of how data moves, how your community should have their own brand, up to kind of just learning how to talk with other departments to kind of bring everything together. A lot of things that you are saying puts a lot of things in perspective. A lot of gears are turning in my head where I click things and I'm like, okay, like this is definitely something that clicks in the community. But everything you are saying is definitely very, very helpful. I just wanted to kind of just let kind of give my feedback on that.
Yeah, Thank you. Wonderful. I'm really happy that it's useful. And like I said, in a lot of cases, these theories and these structures, they make a lot of sense, but it takes a lot for you to really like get the head around and like connect them. So I do recommend, even if you may not have a use case right now, consider going to your boss and saying, hey, so I heard about this structure. Do you think this is something we can adapt and try for the next big policy that we might have? But thank you. I really appreciate that. We call that in our local communities passing the lollipop. It's based off of a really old TED Talk. Anyone else? All right. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and move on. This is the one that I was really worried we might not have time for. But this is probably the most important one to me, like emotionally. The Socio-Ecological Model is my favorite one. Communication constitutes organization is the foundation of my business. But this one, this is a communication and politics theory that I have found I have to use every single day in relational community management, actually being on the ground every day, talking to people. And I also think it's the most important one for our society and the health of community infrastructure as a whole. What does the internet look like? How are we having conversations? Because it really has a lot to do with people's opinions, cultural lenses, and clashes that you get. Just kind of hands up, has anyone ever heard of the wicked problems mindset? Just sound off in the chat if you have.
Vinny, I was just wondering, are you sharing some slides? Because we don't see anything on the screen except all of us for the last couple of minutes. So,
I'm sorry about that.
thanks.
No worries. We didn't really miss much because it's just in this slide here.
Sure, thanks.
No worries. So the wicked problems mindset, I think, is probably the most important one. And it was done by Martine Carcassonne, who I had the immense pleasure of working under for a while at a company called, well, not a company, but a institution in Colorado State University called the Center for Public Deliberation. And it's about a new form of deliberative democracy based around the wicked problems mindset. So essentially, there are two types of problems in the world. There are plain problems where even no matter how difficult they are, no matter how many years they take to figure out, no matter how much money needs to be pumped into them, if you put enough experts in a room for a long enough time, you can solve the issue. There is an answer. It actually has a solution. And then there are wicked problems. So the real problems facing democracy are the wicked issues that don't have solutions. And these are born out of different cultural lenses, people who have different value sets, echo chambers, information that people garner, emotional responses. These are problems that can't be solved. And there is an inherent issue with that. So as an example, the reason why I use this freeway pass, it's not actually like symbolism, it's actually real. For a lot of people throughout all of Los Angeles, California, here in the States, they view traffic as a parking lot. It is absolutely terrible. It really stresses a lot of people out. They spend hours on end on the freeway. And their civil engineers in LA are really good. And they've learned and they've figured out ways to solve the problem. They need to build specific roads, break down specific roads. They know what they need to do. But the big problem with this is in order to build infrastructure in or around LA, you need consent. You need public disclosure. You need conversations. You need open houses in your local communities. And a lot of those people run into problems where it's like, yes, I hate the traffic, but I do not want throughways to be built in my neighborhood where I have children. And in a lot of ways, those decisions get bogged down in a set of values that aren't really problematic, so to speak. Like there's just people are contending between two competing values like security versus freedom, or safety versus exploration or creativity. And this happens on an organizational level, small group level, happens on all levels of social structure. And what ends up happening is there are some inherent flaws, and your community is going to run up against this as well. So because wicked problems have this tendency in individual brains of right and wrong, you as a community manager now need to start structuring what you're going to do in your community as advantages and drawbacks, and start to mix and match them, figure out what those values are. You also need to recognize that the vast majority of the discussions coming out of your community are decisions that are made based on emotion, fear, things like that, and logic tends to confirm it. Because logic tends to confirm it rather than do anything else, your focus should not be on what we should do. It should be on what do people feel about the potential of doing things. You also need to value risk. A lot of people are more quickly going to respond to the risk of a situation, what am I going to lose, than what am I going to gain. So security and freedom are not bad things, right? But when your security is being stressed, people are very quick not to recognize the freedoms they gain, but rather the risks they are affording as a result of it. And all of this kind of builds into perspective bias. The more ingrained, the more you learn about something, the more your blinders are on, right? In order to go deep, walls get built. So you have to really work to break that down, because that's what's leading to your extremism and your polarization in online communities. And if your community starts to build too much of a bubble, you as the community manager now need to start to say, hey, we're reaching out to this other community to have a shared event in order to broaden and challenge your emotional perspectives. So here's how you can do that. Here's how we can apply. We have business as usual. We have the status quo, and we need to make a change. So now we're going to go through this entire infrastructure. We're going to say, what change should that be? We're going to diverge, and that's going to be meeting one. And then you're going to produce a document, communication constitutes organization. And then you're going to argue over that for a set period of time, a grown zone. And then once that's done, once you have developed a plan, you're going to come back and you're going to repeat that meeting for practicality. And you're going to say, here's 3 approaches we have to this problem. Here's the advantages and the drawbacks that we are identifying. And then we're going to just work through each plan. And we're going to ask you not what you think, but how you feel about each one. Based upon your lens and your values, what is going on with it? And then at that point in time, when you make a decision, people will feel like they were listened to. You will have the audience research necessary and the community interaction necessary to say the broad majority of people wanted to go this way, and we have that support garnered. And you're going to repeat this process all the way from divergent to convergent zone. You're going to do that for need, and you're going to do it for plan, and then you're going to do it for practicality. And there are some decisions in your community that really do not need this. Don't go to your community for those things. Talk about what the community is having problems with. So, big question on the wicked problem mindset. I think that this is a really, really big thing, and I think we can have a larger conversation about it as well. How is this impacting your communities? How are you experiencing this problem? But it comes down to the same question. Is this useful? And if anyone wants to hop on and talk.
Does anybody have any comments?
Hi, Vinay. So I wanted to add is that a lot of the community that I manage is a part of creators. So a lot of writers and designers on the community. Now, a lot of common feedback that we were hearing was on part of the creators blog. So the community was as such divided on not being able to complete certain task assignments because they were going through that phase. And part of the community was they are not getting enough assignment. So this was that polar region that we got onto. And I think we are still trying to figure it out how to generalize this whole process in terms of they get that ample amount of assignments or projects that uh, is being assigned to them, and at the same time they don't have to go through that phase of that creator burnout, that creator block phase. So this is something that I like recalled while you were talking about the wicked problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's a particularly difficult issue, right? Because if you try to make one move to satisfy a portion of the community, you're going to put at risk other people's value that they're getting out of it, right?
Right, yeah. So I think this is still in process of figuring out, and like you mentioned, the gray zone that we are in between.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So what stage would you say you're in? Are you in need, plan, or practicality?
I think we are in the plan phase. Uh, we already have like the need is already defined. The practicality of that plan is still being assessed because we have been having constant feedbacks from the community members. So I don't. So that plan phase is being extended still so long because we haven't been able to find a practical solution to it. But yeah, I think we are still on the plan phase.
Yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, I'm interested to hear more. If you wanted to, I'm a part of the CMX groups on Slack and Discord. I also have my own Discord. I would love to get some feedback on how that goes over the course of the next while. Is there anyone else who kind of got some ideas or some light bulb moments or wants to talk a bit about this? If you have any words of wisdom of your own.
Alex has an interesting comment. He says, I feel like this is a good reminder of feedback in general. Too often, as the community manager, I'll make some kind of change based on the first actionable change suggested and not always giving time for other opinions instead of allowing a certain amount of time for rebuttal on that decision. So that was really neat feedback. Thank you, Alex.
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely agree. I think there are some things that's just not worth coming to the community about. And if you come to the community for things that don't matter, one really, really big case study was when I arrived in New Zealand, there was this big conversation about Maori interaction in the government in general. There just wasn't enough diversity of Native populations. And that was also being discussed in terms of other ethnicities kind of coming in and getting a voice in the governance, which was a big conversation that wasn't really being had. But the conversation that was being had was that New Zealand wanted to make a new national flag and had like this really, really big discussion where they brought to everyone like an open forum for this flag. And 90% of the people are like, you're wasting our time. Why are we talking about a flag when we should be talking about this? And it really brought like an entire nation up in arms because the government was ignoring the conversation they wanted deliberative discussion about. And the flag was just being, it was usurping a larger conversation when it really could have been more bureaucratic in nature. So I definitely agree with you, Alex, there. So with that, we're kind of going to move. I just have a few quick statements, and then I'd like to go ahead and move into Q&A. If you found all of this useful, I have provided 2 forms that I think will work to introduce for you a lot of these discussions. So we already talked about the community-centric brand voice. So this is the idea of bringing together a cohesive brand, like Campbell's Soup kind of brand, and then starting to diversify that and bring it into a humanized organization kind of mode. So that'll use the socio-ecological model really well. And then there's the brand identity blueprint. I invite you to have a tough discussion, a hard discussion about your brand identity, and use the wicked problems mindset and build a need, plan, and practicality mindset with your brand as an example, because it really is a muscle, right? You need to practice it. And I think that starting with your brand values and your mission, really looking at that and what it means for your product is a great place to put the wicked problems mindset into action. So if you just go to scms.me and then you just type in CMX brand identity blueprint, BIB, or brand voice, you should bring those up completely free. Please download them. Let me know how it goes. I also have my own Discord that I am looking to build. It hasn't quite launched yet because Socially Constructed is relatively new in this regard. But I really, really want to hear about your implementation and your success factors. And if you found this helpful, there were a lot of theories and models and practicalities that I really, really wanted to implement in this talk, but unfortunately there's just too much going on. So I am actually building 4 workbooks all about encapsulating and applying social scientific models to community management. And the first of those 4 books is out and ready and getting published right now. You can buy it and download it. And then if you want to hear about the other workbooks, it's going to be a process from building a magnetic brand to building a platform to building a community strategy and a community charter, and then building a measurable system. Those are going to be what the 4 workbooks are for. If you want to be a part of that journey as I'm building all of this content, this is a really great place to start. And I'm going to be providing 20% off both the template dossiers and the brand community workbook so that you can get all 9 exercises on your own. Or if you want an annotated instructional sheet, I also have that for you as well, which is a much larger workbook. So that's it. That's my plug. If you do want to hear more about me or anything like that, stay until after the Q&A. And I look forward to hearing more and meeting you and hearing what awesome stuff you're doing. That'll be it for the presentation, and we can just kind of ignore it now.
Thank you so much, Venya, for that wonderful presentation. I feel like I have so many things to think about and to write about. Thanks to everybody for joining us. I just wanted to point out a few things that you can check out. If you want to learn more about CMX, I've posted a link for CMX if you'd like to join our Slack workspace, and we'd love to have you. The link is also there. We have a Facebook group too that you might be interested in. And also we're doing a brief survey with Cassie's going to be taking a short break, and Jody and I are going to be taking center stage until she returns. We want to know what would you like us to plan for you? What do you want to learn? What's interesting to you? So you will also have an opportunity to take the survey elsewhere. But here it is. And I can also send folks out links again to Venya's LinkedIn, to Socially Constructed, or to her Discord, or any other place if you'd like. It is in... you should have gotten a confirmation email, and they're there as well, but I'm happy to send them. So if there's no more questions, does anybody have any more questions? The link for the free worksheets. Yes, let me post you that again. I just had it. Here's the worksheets. Okay, let me send that again. Here's the link to the worksheets. And without further ado, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Stephanie, Renee, Marianne, Heather, D'Angelo, Alex, Martin, Ritu, Kunal, and who have I missed? Cassie, myself, Venya, of course, Stephanie, Natalie, Sonam, and Susanna. Thank you all so much for joining us. And Heather, thank you all so much for joining us, and we hope you'll come to future events. We look forward to seeing you then. Take care and have the great rest of your day and week.
And before I do that,
Yeah.
I did notice, Stephanie, we've actually talked a little bit about your community in the past. I'm kind of curious because you said we were stuck on keeping our brand, but our alumni community want to have their own brand and we're letting them move forward with that. That is awesome. Solid kudos for that. And that's all I really wanted to say.
Thank you. We're definitely letting them roll with it, and they're managing our Instagram account, and they're holding their own events. And we decided, like, hey, it's okay, and so they're owning it more. They're excited, they're motivated, and that's what we wanted to see. So looking forward to see what happens next with them.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really happy to hear about it. Keep me apprised. I definitely want to hear more. All right, and with that,
Thank you.
If there are any other questions, just contact me on LinkedIn or any of the other places you can find me. I'm good.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. We'll see you soon at the next event.